Imagine this. A pregnant woman stands in court, tears streaming down her face. And her husband? He laughs. In front of everyone. Cameras flash, reporters whisper. Her world is collapsing in real time. But then the courtroom doors swing wide, and the last person anyone expected walks in. Her ex. But not just any ex. A billionaire tech genius who once broke her heart, and might be the only one who can save her now. What happens next will shatter lies, expose secrets, and turn a courtroom into a battlefield for truth. Stay till the end, because this story doesn't just twist once, it reverses everything. If you love stories where justice wins and power gets exposed, hit like, drop a comment, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping dramas that keep your heart racing till the very last second. The courtroom smelled of furniture polish and desperation. Elena Cross sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling against the swell of her 7-month belly. Every breath came shallow, every heartbeat louder than the murmurs echoing through Manhattan Family Court. Room 304. Her husband, David Cross, sat opposite her at the plaintiff's table. He wore a navy Tom Ford suit with an American flag pin on the lapel, the uniform of a man running for Congress. The man who once kissed her forehead every morning, who had promised to love her through everything, now looked at her with something worse than hatred. Pity, perfectly performed, calculated pity, designed for the cameras in the press section. Judge Patricia Reynolds adjusted her reading glasses and reviewed the documents before her. 25 years on the bench had given her face the worn patience of someone who had seen every kind of human cruelty. She flipped through page after page of medical records, psychiatric evaluations, witness statements. Elena watched the judge's face, searching for any sign of sympathy, of understanding. She found none. "Your Honor," Catherine Walsh said, rising smoothly from David's side of the courtroom. She was a woman in her 40s who wore Chanel suits like armor and had a reputation for destroying opposing witnesses. "We have submitted comprehensive psychiatric evaluations showing that Mrs. Cross suffers from severe prenatal depression and has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past 6 months." Elena's attorney, Tom Brennan, stood halfway up. He was an overworked public defender with coffee stains on his tie and 3 other cases scheduled that afternoon. "Objection. Those records are disputed by my client." "Overruled," Judge Reynolds said without looking up. "Continue, Ms. Walsh." Catherine nodded and activated the courtroom's video screen. The lights dimmed slightly. "Your Honor, I would like to present a video deposition from Dr. Jessica Morgan, Mrs. Cross's obstetrician for the past 8 months. The screen flickered to life. Dr. Morgan sat in what appeared to be her office at Mount Sinai Hospital, hands folded professionally on her desk. She wore a white coat with her credentials embroidered on the pocket. She looked trustworthy, authoritative, believable. "In my professional opinion," De Morgan said on the screen, her voice measured and clinical, "Elena Cross poses a potential danger to herself and her unborn child. She has repeatedly refused medication for her documented depression, missed multiple scheduled appointments without explanation, and exhibited paranoid delusions regarding her husband's fidelity and financial decisions. When I attempted to discuss these concerns with her, she became hostile and accused me of being part of a conspiracy against her." Elena's whisper was barely audible. "That is not true. I never said that. I never—" Her lawyer put a warning hand on her arm. Catherine approached the bench with a thick folder. "Your Honor, we also have extensive documentation of Mrs. Cross's erratic behavior. Text messages, emails, witness statements from neighbors and former colleagues." She pulled out several pages. In one text message sent to her husband 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Cross states, and I quote, "I need to get away from him. I will take the baby somewhere safe where you will never find us." Elena's voice rose, panic edging into her tone. "Those are completely out of context. He was threatening me. He had been having an affair and—" "Mrs. Cross," Judge Reynolds' voice was firm, "please control yourself, or I will have you moved from this courtroom." Elena's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client is clearly in emotional distress. Given her condition, I respectfully request a brief recess." That was when David laughed. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was an audible, condescending chuckle that carried through the silent courtroom, like a slap across Elena's face. The sound cut through every other noise, through the shuffling of papers and the quiet breathing of 50 people packed into the gallery. David leaned toward Catherine Walsh and stage whispered, just loud enough for the microphones to catch every word. God, she is good at this. Look at that performance. The gallery gasped. Cameras flashed from the press section like lightning. Elena felt the tears she had been fighting for 3 hours break free, tracing hot paths down her pale cheeks. She pressed both hands against her belly, feeling her son kick as if he could sense her distress. Mr. Cross, Judge Reynolds' voice cracked like a whip through the courtroom. You will control yourself in my courtroom, or I will hold you in contempt. Is that understood? David stood smoothly, his face arranging itself into an expression of perfect contrition. He was good at this. He had always been good at performing sincerity. My deepest apologies, Your Honor. It is just that I have lived with this particular drama for 7 years of marriage. The tears, the emotional manipulation, the constant accusations. I am tired, Your Honor. Tired of being painted as the villain in her increasingly disturbed narrative. Elena locked eyes with him across the courtroom. He held her gaze and gave her that smile. That specific smile she knew so well. The one that said more clearly than any words, no one will ever believe you. You are alone in this. And looking at the judge's face, at the skeptical expressions in the gallery, at the reporters scribbling in their notebooks, Elena realized with crushing certainty that he was right. Mrs. Cross, Judge Reynolds said, her voice softer now, but no less final, I am inclined to grant temporary emergency custody to McCross upon the child's birth, pending a full psychiatric evaluation of your fitness as a mother. Do you understand what that means? Elena could not speak. Her throat had closed completely. She managed a small nod, but inside, her world was shattering into pieces she would never be able to put back together. Judge Reynolds looked at the documents before her one more time. Given the medical evidence, the documented erratic behavior, and Mrs. Cross's clear emotional instability even here in this courtroom, I believe the child would be at risk in her care. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and tell them all the truth, that David had been gaslighting her for months, that he had been drugging her prenatal vitamins to make her feel crazy, that his mistress Vanessa had orchestrated this entire scheme to destroy her credibility. But she knew how it would sound, like the ravings of a paranoid, unstable woman. Exactly what they wanted. Catherine Walsh stood, buttoning her jacket with satisfied precision. Your Honor, my client only wants what is best for his unborn child. Given Mrs. Cross's documented instability, her refusal to seek help, and her increasingly threatening behavior, the courtroom doors slammed open with a crash that made everyone jump. The sound reverberated through the silence like thunder, like an explosion, like the hand of God reaching down into that moment. Every head in the courtroom turned as one toward the doors. Sunlight exploded from the corridor, backlighting the silhouette of a tall man in a charcoal gray suit. For one frozen, breathless moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The entire courtroom held its collective breath. Then the man stepped forward into the light, and Elena's heart stopped beating. She knew that walk. She knew the exact angle of those shoulders. She knew that face, even though she had not seen it in 8 years. Your Honor, Julian Hart said, his voice calm and steady and unmistakably familiar, cutting through the shocked silence like a knife through silk. I apologize for the dramatic interruption. My name is Julian Hart, and I have information directly relevant to these proceedings. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the gallery like wind through wheat fields. Is that Julian Hart, the tech guy? Holy shit, that is Julian Hart, the billionaire who sold that AI company. Wait, is not that her ex-boyfriend? I read about them in Business Insider. A reporter in the third row grabbed her colleague's arm hard enough to bruise. That is Julian Hart. He is worth $8 billion. What is he doing here? Judge Reynolds slowly removed her reading glasses, her expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. Mr. Hart, this is a closed family court session. Who authorized your entry into this courtroom? Julian walked down the center aisle with the kind of confidence that came from having more money than God and nothing left to lose. He was 6'2", sandy brown hair slightly disheveled, wearing expensive jeans under his blazer in that casual billionaire way that said he did not need to prove anything to anyone. His eyes, perpetually tired from too many 18-hour workdays, scanned the courtroom before landing on Elena. Their eyes met, and Elena felt 8 years of regret and longing and pain crash over her like a wave. "Your bailiff authorized my entry, Your Honor," Julian said, stopping at the bar that separated the gallery from the court proper. "I informed him that I had evidence of fraud being perpetrated against this court." Catherine Walsh's face flushed an angry red. She shot to her feet. "This is absolutely outrageous. This man has no standing here. Your Honor, I demand he be removed immediately and held in contempt." David's composure flickered for just a moment. His jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping beneath his carefully shaved skin. His hands, which had been relaxed on the table, curled into fists. Julian pulled a folder from inside his jacket and held it up. "Your Honor, I understand this is irregular, but the evidence I have suggests that Mrs. Cross is the victim of a coordinated campaign to discredit her and steal custody of her child." Judge Reynolds leaned back in her chair, studying Julian with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every courtroom trick in the book. "Mr. Hart, are you an attorney?" "No, Your Honor." "Are you a licensed private investigator?" "No, Your Honor." "Then what exactly is your relationship to Mrs. Cross that gives you any standing to interrupt these proceedings?" Julian hesitated for just a moment. "I was Elena's partner in college. We dated for 4 years at NYU. And I believe she is being systematically framed by her husband and his campaign manager." Catherine Walsh's laugh was sharp and mocking. "So the ex-boyfriend rides in on his white horse to save the damsel in distress? Your Honor, this is a family court, not a romance novel. This is a blatant attempt to manipulate these proceedings through wealth and celebrity." Julian turned to face her directly. "Ms. Walsh, I am here because I have evidence." "Evidence obtained how?" Catherine interrupted. "Through legal means? Or did you use your considerable resources to hack into private accounts? To intimidate witnesses? To buy false testimony?" "None of those things," Julian said, but he fumbled slightly, less certain now. "I simply began investigating when I saw the news coverage and realized something was wrong." Judge Reynolds held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Hart, do you have actual evidence? Admissible evidence that is relevant to this custody determination?" Julian opened the folder. "I have financial records that show—" "How did you obtain these financial records?" the judge interrupted. Julian hesitated again. "I hired investigators to look into Mr. Cross's campaign finances." "So you do not have direct knowledge of any of this alleged fraud?" "You have hired investigators who have provided you with information of questionable provenance." Judge Reynolds' voice was skeptical. "Your Honor, if you would just look at what I have—" "Mrs. Cross!" Elena's voice cut through the courtroom, raw and furious and humiliated. Everyone turned to look at her. She was standing now, both hands braced on the table in front of her, her pregnant belly prominent, tears still wet on her cheeks. Julian turned to her. "Elena, you do not get to do this," she said, and every word was a blade aimed at his heart. "You were not there when my mother was dying of cancer. You were not there when I called you from the hospital begging you to come. You were not there at her funeral. You sent flowers, Julian. Orchids, her favorite, but you were not there." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "You chose a business meeting over me," Elena continued, her voice shaking. "You chose your company over the woman you claimed to love. You were not there when I needed you. So you do not get to show up now, 8 years later, and play hero. You do not get to use your money and your power to swoop in and fix my life because you feel guilty about the past." Julian's face went pale. "Elena, I know I failed you. That is why I am here now. I am not going to fail you again." "It is too late," Elena said quietly. "It was too late 8 years ago." Judge Reynolds cleared her throat. "Mr. Hart, I appreciate your evident concern for Mrs. Cross. But without proper evidence, without much standing in this case, I cannot allow you to disrupt these proceedings." She looked at Elena's lawyer. "Mr. Brennan, do you have any objection to Mr. Hart being removed from this courtroom?" Tom Brennan looked at Elena. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. What was the point? This was already a disaster. "No objection, Your Honor," Brennan said quietly. "Wait," Julian's voice was urgent. "Your Honor, Give me 48 hours. Let me gather proper evidence through legal channels. Let me prove that Mrs. Cross is being framed. Catherine Walsh laughed again. This is ridiculous. Your Honor, my client has cooperated fully with these proceedings. We have provided extensive medical and documentary evidence. We have nothing to hide. But David stood, and his voice was smooth as silk. Actually, Your Honor, I have no objection to a short continuance. I am confident that any investigation will only prove what we have already demonstrated. That my wife needs help, not custody of a newborn child. He turned to Julian with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Let Mr. Hart waste his money and his time. Let him dig into my life as much as he wants. He will find nothing because there is nothing to find. Judge Reynolds looked between them all, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. Very well, I am granting a 48-hour continuance. Mr. Hart, if you waste this court's time with frivolous allegations or illegally obtained evidence, there will be serious consequences. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. This court is in recess. We will reconvene at 9 a.m. on Thursday. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. The courtroom erupted into noise. Reporters rushed for the doors to file their stories. The gallery buzzed with speculation. But Elena just gathered her things with shaking hands, trying not to cry anymore, trying to hold on to the last shreds of her dignity. As the bailiff approached to escort her out, she risked one more glance at Julian. He was standing in the aisle watching her, his expression full of regret and determination, and something that might have been love if she let herself believe in such things anymore. Their eyes met across the emptying courtroom. His expression said, "Trust me, I can fix this." Hers said, "I trusted you once before and you broke me into pieces I am still trying to put back together." But beneath her anger, beneath her humiliation and exhaustion and fear, a tiny spark of something else flickered to life in her chest. Something she had not felt in months, not since David had begun his campaign to destroy her. Hope, fragile and dangerous and probably foolish, but hope nonetheless. Pete's Diner in Hell's Kitchen was the kind of place that served breakfast 24 hours a day and asked no questions. Elena sat in a corner booth at 10:30 at night, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She should be home. Her lawyer had explicitly told her not to talk to anyone, especially not Julian Hart. But she had nowhere else to go. David had changed the locks on their apartment. Her mother was dead. She had no close friends anymore. David had systematically isolated her over the past 2 years, convincing her that her friends were jealous of their success, that they did not understand the pressures of his political ambitions. Julian slid into the seat across from her without asking permission. Elena did not look up. I should leave. Your lawyer is a public defender handling 42 cases simultaneously, Julian said. With all due respect to Mr. Brennan, you need better representation. I cannot afford better representation. David froze all our joint accounts 3 months ago. I have been living on what I had in my personal checking account, which is now down to about $800. I can afford better representation. Elena finally looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he had walked into that courtroom. He looked older, tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she remembered. There was gray at his temples that had not been there before. Success had cost him something, even if the price was not visible in his $8 billion net worth. I do not want your charity, Julian. It is not charity, he said quietly. It is guilt, and maybe the chance to finally do the right thing. She waited, saying nothing. Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from late nights studying in the NYU library. When your mom got diagnosed senior year, you called me from the hospital. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. You were crying so hard you could barely talk. Do you remember what you said? Elena's throat tightened. Julian, you said she has 6 months, maybe less. Can you come? I need you. And I was in a pitch meeting with Series A investors who had flown in from San Francisco. And I told you I would call you back. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. You never did. Not that night. Not when she went into hospice 3 months later. Not when she died. You sent flowers to the funeral. Orchids, your mom's favorite. You remembered the flowers, but not your girlfriend, not the woman you said you loved. Julian flinched like she had slapped him. I was 23 and stupid and thought building a company was more important than showing up for the people I loved. I thought success meant something. I thought money would make me feel less empty. He laughed bitterly. I have $8 billion now, Elena, and I still feel empty because I lost the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes again. She was so tired of crying. And now you want redemption? You want to be the hero who saves me so you can feel better about yourself? No, Julian said. I do not want redemption. I do not deserve it. I just want to help you fight, because you should not have to fight alone. Elena pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She scrolled through her photo gallery until she found what she was looking for. Bank statements. She had been photographing everything for 3 months, ever since she realized something was wrong. She showed him the first image. We had $1.2 million in our joint savings account from selling our Brooklyn condo. It was going to be our son's college fund, a down payment on a house in Westchester, our safety net. Julian leaned forward, studying the numbers. 6 weeks ago, $847,000 disappeared, transferred into an LLC called Pierce Consulting. She swiped to the next image. I had never heard of Pierce Consulting, so I started digging. Julian's eyes widened. Pierce, as in Vanessa Pierce? David's campaign manager, his right hand, the woman he has been sleeping with for the past year. Elena's voice was flat, emotionless. She had cried about the affair months ago. Now it was just another piece of evidence, another weapon to be used. You know about the affair? I have known for 8 months, since I found texts on his phone. She swiped through more images. But I also found something else. Emails between David and Vanessa. They started planning this custody strategy 6 months ago, right after I found out I was pregnant. She showed him an email dated February 14th, Valentine's Day. The subject line read, "The Elena Problem." Julian read aloud. She is getting suspicious about the Pierce Consulting transfers. We need to neutralize her credibility ASAP. I will handle Dr. Morgan. He looked up. Who is Dr. Morgan? My obstetrician, the one who testified today that I am mentally unstable and dangerous. Jesus Christ. Elena swiped to another email. This one is from David to Vanessa. Do what you need to do. Just make it look organic. By the time we get to court, no one will believe a word she says. Julian sat back, his face pale. Elena, this is huge. This is conspiracy. This is fraud. You have proof of everything. I have screenshots on my phone, Elena corrected. The actual bank records, the original emails, all of that is on my laptop at home. She closed her eyes. Along with more emails, financial documents showing where that $847,000 actually went, and evidence that David has been taking illegal campaign contributions and hiding them in offshore accounts. Julian pulled out his phone immediately. Give me your address. I will send someone to get... No, Elena's voice was sharp. I need to be there. I need to know exactly what we are taking, how we are taking it, and that the chain of custody is clean. If we mess this up, if we give them any reason to claim we tampered with evidence, it is over. Julian nodded slowly. Okay, when? Now, tonight, before David realizes what we are doing. They left the diner 20 minutes later, after Elena forced herself to eat half a sandwich. The November air was cold against her face, sharp and clean. Her car was parked 2 blocks away in a parking lot that charged $20 for 4 hours. They walked in silence, Elena's hand resting protectively on her belly. Her son was kicking, restless. She wondered if he could feel her anxiety, her fear, her desperate hope that this might actually work. When they reached the parking lot, Elena stopped so suddenly that Julian almost walked into her. The driver's side window of her Honda Civic was shattered. Glass glittered on the pavement like scattered diamonds, catching the streetlights. The passenger seat where she had left her laptop bag was empty. No, Elena whispered. No, 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 no. Julian was already on his phone, fingers flying across the screen. The parking lot should have security cameras. I am accessing them now through... He stopped. Never mind how, just watch. He held up his phone. The security footage showed her car from an angle. A timestamp read 9:47 p.m. A figure in hospital scrubs and a surgical mask approached her car, looked around once, then smashed the window with what looked like a small hammer. The person reached inside, grabbed her laptop bag, and walked away. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. They were tracking me, Elena said, her voice hollow. David has been tracking my phone. That is how they knew I would be at the diner. That is how they knew about the laptop. She felt it then, a sharp, stabbing pain low in her abdomen. Not the baby kicking. Something else. Something wrong. The pain radiated out from her center, making her gasp. Elena! Julian's voice seemed to come from very far away. Her knees buckled. Julian caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong around her. Hospital, she managed to say through gritted teeth. Something is wrong. The baby... I have got you, Julian said. He was already lifting her, carrying her toward his car parked at the curb. I have got you. You are going to be okay. The baby is going to be okay. But as another wave of pain crashed through her, Elena was not sure she believed him. The drive to Mount Sinai Hospital took 8 minutes. Julian ran 3 red lights and did not care. Elena sat in the passenger seat with both hands pressed against her belly, feeling her son moving frantically inside her, feeling the contractions that were not supposed to be happening for another 3 weeks. Please, she whispered to her son, to God, to the universe. Please do not take him from me. He is all I have left. The emergency room was bright and antiseptic and filled with the controlled chaos of a Saturday night in Manhattan. Julian carried Elena through the automatic doors, shouting for help. Nurses appeared with a wheelchair. Questions were fired at her. How far along? When did the pain start? Any bleeding? Any fluid? Elena answered on autopilot while they wheeled her into an examination room. A doctor appeared, young and competent looking. She checked Elena's vitals, examined her, attached fetal monitors. You are having contractions, the doctor said after a long moment, but they are not progressing. Your cervix is not dilated. This is stress-induced early labor. We are going to admit you for observation overnight, give you medication to stop the contractions, and monitor the baby. Is he okay? Elena's voice cracked. Is my son okay? The doctor smiled. His heartbeat is strong. He is a fighter. But you need to rest, and you need to avoid stress. Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of that advice. They admitted her to a private room on the maternity floor. Julian stayed, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. A nurse brought him a pillow and a blanket, but he did not use them. He just sat there watching Elena with those tired eyes, making sure she was breathing. At 2 in the morning, Elena woke from a restless half-sleep to find Julian still there, his laptop open, working. You do not have to stay, she said quietly. I know. Outside the window, Manhattan glittered like a constellation of fallen stars. Somewhere out there, David was probably celebrating his victory. Vanessa was probably planning their next move. And Elena was lying in a hospital bed, alone except for a man who had abandoned her 8 years ago. He has been drugging me, Elena said suddenly into the darkness. Julian's head snapped up. What? Elena reached into her purse on the bedside table and pulled out a prescription bottle. Her hands shook as she held it out to him. My prenatal vitamins. For months I felt wrong, foggy, anxious, paranoid. I started forgetting things, losing time. I would have conversations with David that I could not remember the next day. Julian took the bottle, examining the label in the dim light from his laptop screen. I thought I was losing my mind, Elena continued, her voice breaking. I genuinely thought I was going crazy, that everything David was saying about me was true, that I was unstable and paranoid and unfit to be a mother. Elena, 2 weeks ago, I accidentally dropped my vitamin bottle down the bathroom sink. I had to get a new prescription. But the new pills looked different, slightly different color, so I did not take them. And within 3 days, my head started to clear. I could think again. I could remember things. That is when I started keeping records, taking pictures of everything, documenting all of it. Julian was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold with fury. He was gaslighting you chemically. The prescription is from Dr. Jessica Morgan, the same doctor who testified today that I am mentally unstable. Dr. Morgan, who happens to be the one treating you. Dr. Morgan, who happens to be sleeping with Thomas Brennan, David's law partner and campaign treasurer. Elena finished. Julian stood abruptly and pulled out his phone. I am calling someone right now, Dr. Rebecca Sinclair. She has been on my foundation's board for 5 years. She is one of the best obstetricians in New York. First thing tomorrow morning, she is going to test these vitamins and document everything with proper chain of custody. And she is going to be your new doctor. Julian, this is too much. I cannot ask you to. You are not asking, he interrupted gently. I am offering. You saved my life once. Let me return the favor. Elena looked at him, confused and exhausted. When did I ever save your life? Julian sat back down and a small smile crossed his face. Junior year, second semester. I was failing organic chemistry, like epically failing. I thought my whole backup plan of going to med school if the startup thing did not work out was dead. I was having panic attacks in the library at 2 a.m., and you found me. Elena remembered. She had been studying for her own finance exam when she heard someone hyperventilating in the stacks. She had found Julian surrounded by chemistry textbooks, convinced his life was over because of one B-. You tutored me for 3 weeks straight, Julian continued. You made flashcards. You explained electron orbitals using a bag of M&Ms. You sat with me until 4 in the morning before the final exam. And when I passed, barely but I passed, do you remember what you told me? Elena's voice was soft. That failing one thing does not make you a failure. That success is not a straight line. Exactly. Julian reached out like he might take her hand, then thought better of it. So stop acting like you have already lost. Stop acting like this is over. Because it is not over until you say it is. The hospital television played quietly in the background, volume low. A news anchor's voice drifted through. Federal prosecutors announced today an expansion of their investigation into campaign finance violations among New York congressional candidates. Sources say several high-profile races are under scrutiny for potential donor fraud and unreported contributions. Elena sat up slightly, ignoring the protest from her IV line. Julian, is that about David's campaign? Julian turned to watch the screen, his expression unreadable. Could be. He raised $4 million in 6 months for a House seat. That is unusual for a first-time candidate running in a district where the incumbent only raised $2 million over 2 years. You think the federal government is investigating him? I think someone should be, Julian said. That kind of money comes from somewhere, and if those screenshots you took are accurate, a lot of it came from illegal sources. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a piece clicking into place. Julian, what if we do not need to prove everything ourselves? What if we just need to point the FBI in the right direction? Julian looked at her, understanding dawning. You are brilliant, you know that? I am a forensic financial analyst who followed the money for 6 years before I quit to support David's career, Elena said. Of course I am brilliant. For the first time in months, she smiled. A real smile, small and fragile, but real. Get some rest, Julian said. Tomorrow we start fighting back. And this time we are not fighting fair. But Elena could not sleep. She lay in the hospital bed with one hand on her belly, feeling her son move beneath her palm, strong and alive, despite everything. 3 weeks until he was born. 3 weeks to prove she was not crazy, not unstable, not unfit. 3 weeks to save her child from being raised by a sociopath and his mistress. She closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She was done being a victim. She was done crying and begging and hoping someone would believe her. If David and Vanessa wanted a war, she would give them a war. And she was going to win. Elena discharged herself from the hospital against medical advice at 7 in the morning. The contractions had stopped. The baby's heartbeat was strong. And staying in that room for 1 more minute felt like suffocating. Dr. Rebecca Sinclair had already confirmed what Elena suspected. Her prenatal vitamins contained carefully measured doses of benzodiazepines designed to induce anxiety and confusion without being immediately obvious or life-threatening. This is chemical abuse, Dr. Sinclair had said, her face grave. I am documenting everything, and I will testify to this in court if needed. Waiting for Elena outside the hospital main entrance was someone she had not expected to see. Marcus Torres leaned against a black SUV with tinted windows, arms crossed over his chest. He was 35, her older brother by 3 years, built like someone who had spent time in the gym, but more recently in dive bars. He wore jeans and a battered leather jacket despite the November cold. His face was harder than she remembered, lined with experiences she had not been part of for the past 3 years. "Heard you were in trouble," he said without preamble. "Took you long enough to call." "I did not call you," Elena said, though she was secretly glad to see him. Marcus looked past her to where Julian was emerging from the hospital, carrying Elena's discharge papers. "You must be the billionaire ex-boyfriend." Julian extended his hand. "Julian Hart." Marcus shook it, his grip just slightly too firm, testing. "Marcus Torres, the brother she has been pretending does not exist." "Marcus, do not start," Elena began. "I warned you about David 3 years ago," Marcus interrupted, his voice hard. "At Thanksgiving. Remember? I said he had dead eyes, that he looked at you like you were a possession, not a person. You told me I was being dramatic and asked me to leave." Elena's voice was sharp with the old hurts. "You also said I was only staying with him because I had no self-esteem and I would never amount to anything without a man to take care of me." Marcus flinched. "I was drunk and angry that you had stopped taking my calls, and wrong. Completely, stupidly wrong." He opened his arms. "Forgive me, sis." Elena hesitated for just a moment, then let him pull her into an awkward hug. He smelled like coffee and cigarettes and the cologne their father used to wear. Something tight in her chest loosened slightly. "What are you doing here?" she asked when they separated. "Helping." "So what is the play?" Julian gave me the broad strokes on the phone, but I want details. "We need David's old laptop," Elena said. "It is in our storage unit in Brooklyn. Red Hook Self-Storage, Unit 217. I have access because technically I am still legally married to him, but the lease is in his name only." Marcus whistled low. "That is a gray area legally. If you take anything from that unit, his lawyers will claim theft and use it to prove you are unstable and criminal." Julian opened the passenger door of the SUV. "What if we do not take anything? What if we just document what is there?" Marcus grinned, a flash of the brother Elena remembered from before everything went wrong between them. "Now you are talking my language. I know a guy who can clone a hard drive in about 10 minutes without leaving any trace." They drove to Marcus's apartment in the Bronx first. He lived in a third-floor walk-up that smelled like old pizza and industrial cleaner. His living room doubled as his office for the private investigation business he had started after being disbarred 3 years ago. "What happened?" Julian asked, looking at the framed law degree on the wall, the name Marcus Torres, J.D. in fancy script. Marcus handed Elena a glass of water and made sure she sat down before answering. "Threatened a witness who I knew was lying. The witness was a guy who had beaten his girlfriend so badly she lost hearing in one ear. But he had money for good lawyers. I got angry. I made a very specific threat about what would happen to him if he perjured himself on the stand. A threat that involved his kneecaps and a tire iron." He shrugged. "The girlfriend eventually recanted under pressure from her family. He walked. I got disbarred. No regrets." Elena looked at her brother with new eyes. "You never told me that. You stopped taking my calls after the Thanksgiving incident. By the time I was disbarred, we had not spoken in a year." "I am sorry," Elena said quietly. "Do not be. I was an asshole. I am still an asshole, just a more useful one." Marcus pulled equipment out of a closet. "Okay, here is the plan. We hit the storage unit at 2 a.m. Minimal witnesses. I have got a bypass drive that will clone the laptop in 12 minutes without powering it up or leaving any digital footprint. We photograph everything with timestamps and location data. We do not take anything physical. We get in, get the data, get out." "What about security cameras?" Julian asked. "Storage facilities log access times, but they do not watch in real time. As long as Elena uses her legal access code, we are just a wife retrieving her own belongings. Happens every day." They spent the rest of the day planning. Elena tried to rest, but could not stop her mind from racing. At midnight, Marcus made coffee. At 1 a.m., they loaded into his SUV. At 1:30, they were parked 3 blocks from Red Hook Self-Storage, watching the building. "Security guard changes shifts at 2, Marcus said, checking his watch. The new guy is lazier, barely looks at IDs. We go in at 2:05. At exactly 2:05 a.m., Elena walked through the storage facility's front entrance. The security guard, on a kid who could not be more than 22, barely glanced at her eye before buzzing her through. Unit 217 was on the third floor, accessed by a freight elevator that creaked ominously. The hallway smelled like cardboard and dust and forgotten lives. Elena's hand shook as she entered the combination David had given her 2 years ago. She had no idea if he had changed it. The lock clicked open. The metal door rolled up with a screech that sounded deafening in the quiet building. Inside were boxes stacked neatly, labeled in David's precise handwriting. Tax returns 2019-2021. Old clothes, donate. Kitchen items, wedding photos. And one box pushed toward the back, labeled simply, files. 3 minutes, Marcus said, watching his phone. The security system logs how long the unit is open. Anything over 5 minutes triggers a supervisor check. Elena pulled out the box labeled files. Inside, beneath manila folders full of old utility bills and insurance documents, was David's old MacBook Pro, the one he had replaced 2 years ago when he started his campaign. Julian pulled out Marcus's bypass drive and connected it to the laptop without powering it on. A small LED light on the drive began blinking green. 12 minutes, Marcus said. Starting now. They worked in tense silence. Julian's fingers flew over his own laptop, monitoring the data transfer. Elena and Marcus carefully photographed every document in every box, making sure the timestamps and location metadata were captured. Look at this, Elena said, pulling out a folder marked Campaign Strategy, Confidential. Inside were printouts of emails between David and Vanessa going back 18 months, plans for fundraising, donor lists, strategy memos, and one document that made Elena's blood run cold. The heading read, Neutralizing Elena, Action Plan. She photographed every page with shaking hands. 10 minutes, Marcus said. Julian opened another folder on his screen, his face illuminated by the glow. Jesus Christ. He has got spreadsheets here showing campaign contributions that do not match the FEC filings. Elena, there is over $1.3 million in unreported donations. That is wire fraud, Elena said. That is federal. And it gets better, Julian continued, scrolling through files. Or worse, depending on your perspective. These emails show Vanessa setting up shell companies to hide the money. She is not just helping David cheat campaign finance law. She is running her own embezzlement operation on the side. 3 minutes, Marcus warned. Almost done, Julian said. The LED light on the bypass drive turned solid green. Got it. Full clone of the drive. They put everything back exactly as they had found it. The files box went back in its exact position. The MacBook returned to its place beneath the manila folders. Every document was replaced in its original order. 2 minutes and 40 seconds after they had entered, they were walking back down the hallway. The metal door rolled shut behind them with a clang. The security guard nodded at them as they left. Have a good night. You too, Elena said, her voice amazingly steady considering her heart was pounding hard enough to crack ribs. They did not speak until they were back in Marcus's SUV, blocks away from the storage facility. Then Marcus started laughing. Holy shit, we actually pulled that off. We have everything, Julian said, staring at the bypass drive in his hands like it was the Holy Grail. Email correspondence between David and Vanessa planning your discredit campaign. Evidence of Dr. Morgan being recruited to falsify your medical records. Financial documents showing massive campaign finance violations and embezzlement. This is not just custody fraud. This is federal crimes. Elena leaned back in her seat, one hand on her belly, feeling her son moving beneath her palm. Tomorrow we take this to my lawyer. We file an emergency motion. We bury them. Marcus pulled out his phone. I am already drafting it. Judge Reynolds is going to see this first thing in the morning. As they drove back toward Marcus's apartment through empty pre-dawn streets, Elena felt something she had not felt in months. Control, power, the sense that maybe, just maybe, she was not fighting a losing battle. We are going to win this, she said quietly. Julian looked at her and smiled. Yes, we are. Neither of them knew that in less than 12 hours, everything would fall apart, that their victory would turn to ashes, that Vanessa Pierce was 3 steps ahead, as always, in waiting to spring her final trap. For now, they allowed themselves to hope. And sometimes, even false hope is better than no hope at all. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. Thursday morning. Julian had hired Elena, a real attorney. Margaret Chen was 60 years old, 5 feet tall, and had never lost a custody case in 30 years of practice. She charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every penny. They arrived at Manhattan Family Court at 9:30. Elena wore a navy blue maternity dress that Julian had a personal shopper select and delivered to Marcus's apartment. She looked professional, composed, nothing like the hysterical woman David's lawyers had painted. Margaret carried a leather briefcase containing hard copies of everything they had found. The laptop clone was on a secured drive, copied to 3 separate cloud storage systems as backup. They had evidence, real, damning evidence. David and Vanessa's conspiracy laid bare in black and white. The hallways outside the courtroom were packed with reporters. News of the continuance and Julian Hart's dramatic intervention had made national headlines. Billionaire attempts to save pregnant ex-girlfriend in custody battle, read the New York Post. Tech mogul Julian Hart claims conspiracy against Elena Cross, said the Times News. David was already seated at the plaintiff's table when they entered the courtroom. He looked perfectly composed in another expensive suit, but Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was slightly clenched. Catherine Walsh sat beside him, reviewing documents, her expression unreadable. Judge Reynolds took her seat promptly at 10. We are here regarding the motion to present new evidence in the matter of Cross versus Cross. Ms. Chen? Margaret stood smoothly. Your Honor, we have obtained significant evidence that Mr. Cross and his campaign manager, Vanessa Pierce, conspired to discredit Mrs. Cross through falsified medical records, drugged prenatal vitamins, and illegal financial manipulation. We are prepared to present this evidence along with expert testimony. She approached the bench with her tablet. These emails, obtained legally through Mrs. Cross's authorized access to marital property, clearly show a coordinated 18-month campaign to make Mrs. Cross appear mentally unstable. Furthermore, we have discovered evidence of serious campaign finance violations that suggest criminal activity beyond the scope of this custody matter. Catherine Walsh rose smoothly to her feet, and Elena felt the first cold finger of dread touch her spine. Catherine's smile was too confident, too satisfied. Your Honor, may I inquire as to how this evidence was obtained? Catherine's voice was silk over steel. Margaret hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Elena saw it, Julian saw it, everyone in the courtroom saw it. Mrs. Cross accessed documents from a storage unit to which she has legal access as the spouse of a storage unit leased solely in Mr. Cross's name. Catherine interrupted smoothly. She produced her own documents and approached the bench. Your Honor, I have here the lease agreement for Red Hook Self-Storage, Unit 217. As you can see, only David Cross is named on the lease. The agreement explicitly states that only the named leaseholder has access rights. Judge Reynolds' expression hardened as she reviewed the documents. Furthermore, Catherine continued, her voice gaining momentum, security footage shows that Mrs. Cross, her brother Marcus Torres, and Mr. Julian Hart accessed this unit at 2:07 a.m. this morning. They were inside for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. During that time, they accessed a password-protected computer belonging exclusively to Mr. Cross. Elena's stomach dropped. They had the security footage. Of course they had it. They had probably been watching the storage unit for days, waiting for Elena to make exactly this move. Margaret stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Cross has not removed anything from... Objection sustained, Catherine said, cutting her off. The method of access is irrelevant. What matters is that private, password-protected files were accessed without the owner's permission. Your Honor, surely you can see that this is fruit of the poisonous tree. This evidence was obtained through an illegal search of my client's private property. Judge Reynolds looked at the security footage Catherine was playing on her tablet. The timestamp clearly showed 2:07 a.m. There was Julian, Marcus, and Elena entering the unit. There they were with the laptop. Mrs. Cross, the judge said, her voice disappointed. Did you access your husband's storage unit without his permission in the early hours of this morning? Elena stood, her voice shaking. Your Honor, we did not take anything. You accessed password-protected files on a computer you do not own, Judge Reynolds said. Mrs. Walsh is correct. Regardless of your intentions, this evidence is inadmissible. Your Honor, those emails prove that my husband systematically destroyed my credibility. Elena's voice rose with desperation. They prove that Dr. Morgan falsified my medical records. They prove that I have been drugged and gaslit for months. They may prove all of that, Judge Reynolds said, not unkindly. But they were obtained illegally. I have no choice under the law. This evidence cannot be admitted. Catherine stood with perfect timing. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client wishes to press criminal charges: breaking and entering, theft of intellectual property, unauthorized access to a computer system, and conspiracy to commit theft. The courtroom doors opened. Two NYPD officers entered, moving down the aisle with purpose. David stood, and his face was perfectly arranged in an expression of sad resignation. I truly hoped it would not come to this, Your Honor. I wanted to resolve this matter civilly for our child's sake. But Mrs. Cross has now engaged in criminal activity, enlisted her brother and Mr. Hart in a conspiracy, and proven beyond any doubt that she is willing to break the law to get what she wants. Elena Cross, the first officer said, approaching the defendant's table, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, theft, and conspiracy. The handcuffs were cold against Elena's wrists. She felt the metal click closed and something inside her broke. Not her resolve, not her determination, but her last shred of hope that the justice system would protect her. This is insane, Margaret was shouting, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. Your Honor, my client is 7 months pregnant. She needs to be under medical supervision. Julian Hart? The second officer said, moving toward where Julian had stood up in shock. You are also under arrest as an accessory to this crime. Julian did not resist. He looked at Elena as they led him past, and his face was full of regret and fury. I am sorry, I made this worse. I should have been more careful. Elena wanted to tell him it was not his fault, that she had made the choice to go to the storage unit, that this was her fight and her failure. But her throat had closed completely. Marcus tried to step forward, putting himself between the officers and Elena. This is bullshit. It is my fault. I planned it. They were just... Mr. Torres, Catherine said sweetly, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. We will be filing charges against you as well. I suggest you make yourself available to law enforcement and refrain from leaving the jurisdiction. They were processed at Central Booking in Lower Manhattan, fingerprinted, photographed, strip-searched, which for a 7-month pregnant woman was humiliating beyond words. Elena's jewelry was taken. Her shoelaces were removed. She was given a jumpsuit that barely fit over her belly. She and Julian were placed in adjacent holding cells in the courthouse basement, the kind reserved for defendants awaiting arraignment. The cells were concrete and steel and smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. I am sorry, Julian said through the bars separating them. His voice was hollow. This is my fault. I pushed you to move too fast. I should have worked through legal channels, hired private investigators, taken the time to... Stop, Elena said. She sat on the concrete bench, both hands on her belly, feeling her son kicking frantically as if he could sense her distress. No, I made this worse by trusting that you would save me. I should have known better than to depend on anyone but myself. Elena, that is not fair. Money does not fix everything, Julian. Her voice was flat, emotionless. When are you going to learn that? You cannot just throw your billions at a problem and make it disappear. The world does not work that way. I do not work that way. Julian opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. What was there to say? She was right. He had thought his money and connections could override the system, could bend reality to his will. Instead, he had made everything worse. A corrections officer appeared at Elena's cell. Mrs. Cross, you have a visitor. Elena looked up, confused. My lawyer? Says her name is Vanessa Pierce. Elena's blood turned to ice. I do not want to see her. She says it is important. About your case. Elena almost laughed. The audacity. The absolute breathtaking audacity. Fine, let her gloat. The visitation room was small and claustrophobic, painted institutional gray. Vanessa sat on the other side of the plexiglass partition, and she looked perfect. Platinum blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Burgundy suit that probably cost $3,000. Minimal makeup that made her sharp features look softer. She looked like success, like power, like everything Elena was not. Elena, Vanessa said, her voice warm and almost friendly. I wanted to see you before everything becomes final. Did David send you? Elena's voice was hoarse from crying. Vanessa laughed and the sound was genuine. God, no. David does not even know I am here. He thinks I am at a campaign meeting in Albany. Men are so easy to lie to. Then why are you here? Vanessa leaned forward and her mask of warmth disappeared. Her eyes were cold and calculating. Curiosity mostly. I wanted to see the woman who almost ruined everything. I almost ruined. Elena felt rage surge through her exhaustion. You framed me. You destroyed my life. You drugged me and falsified medical records and stole my child. I did not frame you, Vanessa said calmly, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. I simply revealed who you really are. Weak, emotional, unsuited for the life David needs. You were holding him back from his potential, and I eliminated an obstacle. Elena's hands clenched into fists behind the glass. You are a monster. No, sweetie, I am a survivor. Vanessa's voice took on an edge. You want to know the truth? I will tell you, because you can do absolutely nothing with this information. She leaned back, completely at ease despite being in a jail visitation room. I grew up in 7 different foster homes between the ages of 6 and 18. Do you know what you learn in foster care, Elena? You learn that nice girls finish last. The ones who follow the rules, who trust the adults, who believe that fairness exists. Those girls get used and discarded and forgotten. So you became this, Elena said. You became someone who destroys innocent people. I became someone who takes what she deserves instead of waiting for someone to give it to her, Vanessa corrected. When I met David 3 years ago at a campaign fundraiser, I saw immediately what you could not see because you were too busy playing house. I saw a man with potential, intelligence, charisma, ambition, everything needed for real power, but he was shackled to mediocrity, shackled to you. Elena felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. We were happy. You were comfortable, Vanessa said dismissively. There is a difference. You wanted a nice house in Westchester and a white picket fence and 2.5 children and a golden retriever. David was meant for greatness. He was meant for Congress, maybe the Senate, maybe more. And you were meant for exactly this. She gestured around the visitation room. The prenatal vitamins, Elena said, her voice shaking. That was your idea. Oliver Morgan was surprisingly easy to recruit. It turns out she has been sleeping with Thomas Brennan for 2 years and desperately wants to be medical advisor on David's campaign. A few suggestions about how you were a liability, how you needed to be neutralized, and she was happy to help. The false medical records documenting your instability were my idea, though. I am quite proud of that detail. Elena lunged forward, but the table and her handcuffs stopped her. Guards moved in immediately, hands on their weapons. Vanessa did not even flinch. She just smiled. See? Unstable. Violent. Exactly as documented. You are making this too easy, Elena. Why are you telling me this? Elena demanded. But why come here and confess everything? Vanessa stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands. Because I want you to understand what happens when you play a game you do not know the rules to. You lost to a better player. And soon I will be Mrs. David Cross. I will raise your son. He will call me Mom. He will grow up believing that his birth mother was too mentally ill to care for him. And you will be nothing but a sad footnote in his life story. Elena felt something break inside her. Not her spirit, not her will, but her last illusion that this was a fight she could win through honesty and truth and justice. You know what the best part is? Vanessa continued. David does not even know the full extent of what I have done. He thinks I just helped him with campaign strategy and happened to discover your instability. He has no idea about the embezzlement, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Once we are married and I have legal access to all his assets, I will not need him anymore either. Elena's head snapped up. What? Vanessa's smile widened. You think I did this for him? David is a means to an end, a useful stepping stone. Men like him are a dime a dozen, Elena. Ambitious, corruptible, disposable. The real power is not in being the politician. It is in controlling the politician. And once I have secured that power through marriage, through joint bank accounts, through legal and financial entanglement, well, David might find that his career takes some unfortunate turns, that scandals emerge, that his ambitions are no longer aligned with mine. You would destroy him too, Elena breathed, finally understanding the full scope of Vanessa's plan. I would harvest what I have built and move on to the next opportunity, Vanessa corrected. That is how you survive in this world. You take what you need and you do not apologize for it. She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. I genuinely hope you find peace, Elena. Somewhere where you can get the help you need. Maybe a nice psychiatric facility. I hear Bellevue has an excellent program for women experiencing postpartum psychosis. When Vanessa was gone, when the guards had escorted Elena back to her cell, she sat on the concrete bench and stared at nothing. This was her lowest point. She had no evidence that would be admissible in court. She had no credibility. Even her lawyer was making noises about maybe taking a plea deal, accepting limited supervised visitation, avoiding prison time for the breaking and entering charges. She had lost. Julian was in the cell next to her, and she could hear him on the phone with his lawyers, trying to salvage something from this disaster. But she knew it was useless. Vanessa had outplayed them at every turn. Elena's son kicked hard, a sharp jab that almost hurt. She placed both hands over her belly, feeling him move frantically inside her. I am so sorry, she whispered to him. I am so sorry I could not protect you. I tried. I tried so hard. But in the darkness of that cell, with her future crumbling around her, Elena made a decision. She was done playing by rules that were rigged against her. She was done being the victim, the weak one, the woman who cried while men laughed. If Vanessa wanted to play dirty, Elena would learn the game. She would become what she needed to become. And somehow, some way, she would win. Not for herself anymore, but for her son, because he deserved better than to be raised by monsters. She just needed to figure out how. Marcus posted bail for Elena and Julian 8 hours later. He used money Julian had wired to him, which was technically a violation of the bail conditions, but no one seemed to care. Elena walked out of the courthouse into cold afternoon sunlight, feeling hollowed out like someone had scooped her insides out with a spoon. Reporters shouted questions that Elena ignored. Mrs. Cross, did you break into your husband's storage unit? Elena, are you being manipulated by Julian Hart? Is it true you threatened David Cross? Marcus pushed through them, his hand on Elena's back, guiding her to his SUV. Julian followed, head down, looking exhausted and defeated. The drive to Marcus's apartment in the Bronx was silent. No one seemed to have any words left. Elena sat in the back seat with one hand on her belly, feeling her son moving beneath her palm, and tried not to think about how few options she had left. Marcus's apartment looked exactly as she had left it that morning. Coffee cups still on the table, laptops still open. It felt like a lifetime ago that they had been celebrating their victory, convinced they had finally gotten the evidence they needed. All right, Marcus said, making fresh coffee that no one would drink. Time to regroup and fight dirty. There is no point, Elena said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She is 3 steps ahead of everything. Whatever we try, she has already planned for it. Whatever evidence we find, she will find a way to make it inadmissible or use it against us. Marcus sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Then we do not play her game. We change the rules. We burn it all down. How? Elena's laugh was bitter. We have no evidence, no credibility, no money except what Julian is willing to throw at lawyers who cannot help us. It is over, Marcus. Julian had been standing by the window, staring out at the Bronx streets. Now he turned. Not money, but I have resources, connections, influence. I'm not using your money to bully people, Elena said sharply. Not bully, Julian said. Expose. Marcus is right. We need to change the playing field. Take this out of the courtroom and into the court of public opinion. Marcus snapped his fingers. Exactly. You worked in finance, Elena. You know how to trace money and explain complex financial schemes in ways normal people can understand. Julian, you built a tech empire. You know how to leverage social media and traditional media. You know journalists. Elena looked at her brother, then at Julian. You want to go public with the story. I want to bury David and Vanessa so deep they will need archaeological excavation to find their reputations, Marcus said. I know someone, Sarah Mitchell. She is an investigative reporter for ProPublica. If anyone can tell this story right, make it bulletproof against lawsuits. It is her. Julian pulled out his phone. I know Sarah too. We served on a journalism ethics board together 2 years ago. She is relentless, and she does not scare easily. Elena felt something stirring inside her. Not hope exactly, but something. A sense that maybe this was not completely over. What would we tell her? Everything, Marcus said. The gaslighting, the drugged vitamins, the falsified medical records, the campaign finance violations, the embezzlement, the conspiracy, all of it. But we cannot prove most of it, Elena protested. The evidence from the laptop is inadmissible. We cannot prove it in criminal court, Julian corrected, but we can present it to a journalist who can verify it independently. Sarah has sources in the FBI, the FEC, the Manhattan DA's office. If we give her enough to start digging, she will find corroborating evidence that is admissible. Marcus was already typing on his phone. I am setting up a meeting tomorrow morning, Brooklyn, somewhere public but quiet. Sarah Mitchell met them at a coffee shop in Park Slope at 8 a.m. Friday morning. She was 40 years old, sharp-eyed, with the kind of intensity that came from 20 years chasing truth through institutional lies. She carried a worn leather bag and a recording device that she set on the table between them. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the beginning. Elena told her story about meeting David 6 years ago when she was a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley and he was a young associate at a corporate law firm. About falling in love with his ambition, his intelligence, his charm. About quitting her job to support his legal career and then his political ambitions. About the first time she noticed money missing from their account. Small amounts at first. $500, $1,000. Amounts she told herself could be explained. About finding out she was pregnant and how David's behavior had changed overnight. How he suddenly wanted her to see a specific obstetrician. How he started suggesting she seemed stressed, anxious, forgetful. About the vitamins that made her feel like her mind was unraveling. The panic attacks, the missing time, the conversations she could not remember. About discovering the affair with Vanessa and finding the emails planning her destruction. About the custody case and Julian's intervention and the disastrous decision to access the storage unit. Sarah recorded it all, asking sharp questions, taking notes by hand, even though everything was being recorded. Julian provided financial documents his lawyers had obtained legally through public records requests and Freedom of Information Act filings. Marcus gave her contact information for 3 people who had worked on David's campaign and quit because of Vanessa. This is huge, Sarah said when Elena finally finished. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched. But I need to verify everything independently. Give me 48 hours. 48 hours later, on Sunday evening, the video went live on ProPublica's website and YouTube channel. Elena sat on Marcus's couch, watching herself on the screen. She had forgotten how the interview would look once edited and produced. Sarah had interwoven Elena's testimony with interviews from former campaign staffers, with public financial records showing discrepancies in David's FEC filings, with expert commentary from campaign finance lawyers and domestic abuse advocates. The video was titled simply, Chemical Gaslighting, How a Congressional Candidate Allegedly Destroyed His Wife's Credibility to Win a Custody Battle. Elena watched herself on screen, 7 months pregnant, exhausted but composed. She watched herself tell the camera, I am not asking for sympathy. I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am asking you to look at the evidence, to ask why my medical records suddenly showed instability after I discovered my husband's affair, to ask where $847,000 went from our joint account, to ask why he laughed when I cried in court. The video was devastating in its simplicity. No histrionics, no emotional manipulation, just facts presented clearly and Elena's steady voice explaining what had been done to her. Within 6 hours, it had 2 million views, By Monday morning, 8 million. By Monday evening, 15 million. The hashtag Justice for Elena trended #1 on Twitter nationwide. Comments poured in by the thousands. I believe her. This is what gaslighting looks like. David Cross is a monster. Where is the FBI investigation? Vanessa Pierce needs to be in prison. Protesters appeared outside Manhattan Family Court holding signs that read, "Believe women and justice for Elena." News trucks lined the street. Every major news outlet wanted interviews. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They all wanted to talk to Elena. Celebrities began tweeting support. Politicians called for investigations. A GoFundMe for Elena's legal defense raised $340,000 in less than 48 hours. David's campaign poll numbers, which had been at 42% the previous week, plummeted to 18% overnight. His largest donors pulled their support. His campaign chairman resigned. The Congressional Leadership Fund announced they were withdrawing funding. For the first time in months, Elena felt like she was winning. She sat in Marcus's apartment watching the view count climb, reading the supportive comments, and she let herself hope. Julian brought over Thai food that evening. Marcus ordered pizza. They ate in Marcus's tiny living room and watched cable news anchors discuss the case. "We have got them," Marcus said, scrolling through Twitter on his phone. Public opinion has completely shifted. Look at this thread. A law professor from Columbia breaking down all the illegal things David probably did. 20,000 retweets. "The court does not care about public opinion," Elena said, but she was smiling slightly for the first time in days. "No," Julian agreed, "but the Federal Election Commission does. And so does the FBI." He showed her his phone. "I have been in contact with the FEC's Enforcement Division. They are very interested in those campaign finance discrepancies Sarah documented." Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chen, Dora Chen, her lawyer. "Emergency hearing scheduled. Judge Reynolds wants to revisit custody arrangements given new public information and potential federal investigation. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 9 a.m. This is good news." Elena showed the text to Julian and Marcus. "We did it," Marcus said, grinning. "We actually did it." Julian was more cautious. "Do not celebrate until the judge rules. But this is definitely progress." That night, Elena slept in Marcus's guest room. She slept deeply for the first time in months, one hand on her belly, dreaming for the first time about her son's face without fear that she would never get to see it. She woke at 6 a.m. to her phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. Hundreds of notifications, text messages, emails, Twitter mentions, all within the last hour. With shaking hands, she opened Twitter. The trending hashtag was no longer Justice for Elena. It was Elena Lied. She clicked on the first video. It was her. 8 months ago, based on her visible pregnancy, she looked drunk or high. Her eyes were unfocused. Her voice slurred. "I do not want this baby," video Elena said clearly. "I cannot do this. I never wanted to be a mother. I thought I did, but I do not. David deserves better than this. The baby deserves better than me." The view count was already over 3 million and climbing fast. Elena's hands went numb. The phone dropped onto the bed. "No," she whispered. "No, I never said that. That is not real." She ran to Marcus's room, not bothering to knock. He was already awake, staring at his laptop. "It is fake," Elena said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Marcus, that video is fake. I never said those words. I never felt that way. You have to believe me." "I believe you," Marcus said immediately. "But look at this." He turned his laptop to show her. Twitter was exploding. The video had been posted anonymously an hour ago. The comments were vicious. "She manipulated us. Typical lying woman playing victim. David Cross is the real victim here. She should be in jail for false accusations." Julian called. Elena answered on speakerphone. "It is deepfake technology," Julian said without preamble. "High-level stuff. The video looks real because they used actual footage of you from your old apartment. But I have already sent it to 3 forensic video analysts. They all confirm the audio is synthesized. The lip movements do not quite match. It is off by milliseconds, but it is definitely fake." "Can we prove that in time?" Elena asked. Silence. "I do not know," Julian finally admitted. Forensic video analysis takes days, sometimes weeks to be court admissible. The hearing is in 3 hours. Her phone buzzed again. Another video. This one was audio only, but Elena recognized her own voice immediately. I will take this child somewhere David will never find us. I will disappear. He will never see his son. He does not deserve to be a father. I will make sure of it. Elena's legs gave out. She sat hard on Marcus's floor, the impact jolting through her pregnant body. That is from a fight we had, she said, her voice hollow. 2 months ago, about his affair with Vanessa. The full quote was, if you do not stop sleeping with Vanessa and treating me like an inconvenience, I will take this child somewhere you will never find us. They cut out the first one. They made it sound like an unprovoked threat. Marcus was already examining the audio file. Same thing, sophisticated editing. But to prove it is edited requires expert testimony and time. Elena's phone would not stop buzzing. She looked at the screen. Her Twitter mentions had gone from thousands of supportive messages to thousands of death threats in less than 2 hours. You lying bitch. You deserve to lose your kid. I hope you die in childbirth. David Cross should sue you for everything you have. Sarah Mitchell called. Elena answered because she did not know what else to do. Elena, I am so sorry. Sarah's voice was strained. My editors are pulling the story. They are saying we did not properly vet your claims. The new video evidence calls everything into question. It is fake, Elena said. Sarah, those videos are deep fakes. You have to believe. I do believe you, Sarah interrupted, but we cannot publish that without proof. Our legal team says we would be sued into oblivion. ProPublica is taking down the video. I am sorry, I really am. Within 3 hours, every supportive comment had vanished or been deleted. Every donation was refunded. The GoFundMe page suspended for fraudulent claims. Every celebrity deleted their supportive tweets or posted new ones distancing themselves. The protesters outside the courthouse now carried different signs. David Cross is the victim. Stop false accusations. Elena Cross is a liar. Elena sat on Marcus's couch in complete silence. Julian and Marcus talked around her, strategizing, making calls, trying to find forensic experts who could analyze the videos faster. But she could not hear them anymore. Vanessa had won. Again, completely and utterly. She had taken Elena's moment of victory and turned it into total defeat in less than 3 hours. Elena, Marcus's voice finally broke through. Sis, look at me. She looked at him. We are not done fighting, he said. This is not over. But Elena felt done. She felt like Vanessa had said weeks ago in that jail visitation room, weak, unsuited for this battle, destined to lose. Her son kicked hard, so hard it almost hurt. She gasped and placed both hands on her belly. Elena? Julian was beside her immediately, concerned. I am okay, she said automatically. He is just letting me know he is still here, still fighting. She sat there feeling her son move frantically inside her, and something crystallized in her mind. Vanessa could destroy Elena's reputation. She could manipulate evidence and public opinion and make the whole world hate her. But Elena would not let Vanessa destroy her son's future. If the system would not protect her, she would work outside the system. If evidence would not save her, she would make Vanessa bury herself. I have an idea, Elena said slowly, but it is risky, possibly illegal, definitely dangerous. Marcus and Julian both leaned forward. I am going to give Vanessa exactly what she wants, Elena said, and I am going to make her confess to everything. How? Julian asked. Elena met his eyes. By making her think she has already won. Elena called Vanessa directly from a burner phone Marcus provided. It rang 4 times before Vanessa answered. Hello? Her voice was cautious but curious. It is Elena, she said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Do not hang up. A pause. What do you want? To negotiate. You clearly have all the leverage. I want out. Out? Vanessa's tone shifted to interested. Full custody to David. I disappear completely. New identity, new city, new life. I will not contest anything. I will not give any more interviews. I will vanish, but I want $2 million. Vanessa laughed. Why would I pay you anything? Because I still have David's original laptop, Elena said, forcing confidence she did not feel into her voice. The actual laptop from the storage unit, not copies, the original files with full metadata that would be admissible if obtained through proper legal channels. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could hear Vanessa breathing on the other end of the line. "You are bluffing," Vanessa said finally, but her voice was uncertain. "My!" Elena let the question hang. "You know I am a forensic financial analyst, Vanessa. Do you really think I only found those emails? I kept digging after that night. I found where the money really went. All of it. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the embezzled campaign funds you have been hiding from David." More silence. "I found evidence of crimes that would send you to federal prison for 20 years, Elena continued. "Evidence that the FBI would love to see. Evidence that would not just destroy David's political career, but put you both in prison cells next to each other." How do you know about? Vanessa's composure was cracking. "Because I am smarter than you gave me credit for," Elena said simply. "And because I was documenting everything months before you even knew I was fighting back." She could hear Vanessa thinking, calculating. Elena forced herself to breathe normally, to sound calm and in control, even though her heart was pounding hard enough to crack ribs. "I want to see the laptop first," Vanessa said finally. "Meet me tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., the Loeb Boathouse in Central Park. Bring $500,000 as good faith, cash or immediate wire transfer. Then I will show you the laptop and we will negotiate the rest." "If you are lying to me, I am too tired to lie, Vanessa. I just want out. I want money to start over somewhere. David and you will never find me. That is all." Elena let exhaustion creep into her voice. "You won. You broke me. Congratulations. Now let me have enough to rebuild some kind of life." 8 a.m., Vanessa said after a long moment. "Central Park Boathouse. And Elena, if you try anything, if this is some kind of trap, I will make sure you never see your son again, even for supervised visitation. I will make sure they put you in a psychiatric facility for the rest of your life." "I understand," Elena said, and she hung up before her shaking hands dropped the phone. Julian and Marcus were staring at her. "Please tell me you actually have David's laptop," Marcus said. "No, it is in police evidence lockup." Julian ran his hand through his hair. "So you are bluffing. You are betting everything on Vanessa being guilty and panicking." "I am betting on Vanessa's arrogance," Elena corrected. "She thinks she is smarter than everyone. She cannot resist gloating. If I make her think she has won, that I am completely beaten, she will not be able to help herself. She will want to explain exactly how she destroyed me." Marcus was already setting up equipment on his kitchen table. "You will need a wire, but wires are not admissible in New York without two-party consent." "I know," Elena said. "We are not going to court with this. We are going to the FBI." Julian looked at her. "You already contacted them." "I called Special Agent Maria Gonzalez this afternoon," Elena confirmed. "She is with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. I laid out everything, the emails, the embezzlement, Vanessa's conspiracy, and my plan for tomorrow." "What did she say?" "She said I am either very brave or very stupid," Elena said. "But she also said they have been investigating David's campaign for 3 months. They just did not know about Vanessa's role. If Vanessa shows up with money tomorrow, especially if that money can be traced back to campaign funds or to accounts connected to David, that gives them probable cause for arrests." Marcus grinned. "So the FBI will be there." "They will be there," Elena confirmed. "Plainclothes surveillance, waiting for Vanessa to bury herself." "And if she does not show up?" Julian asked. "Or if she shows up but does not bring money? Or does not confess?" Elena placed both hands on her belly, feeling her son move beneath her palms. "Then I have lost nothing more than I have already lost. My reputation is destroyed. The public thinks I am a liar. The court case is going to David tomorrow at the hearing. I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain." That night, Elena barely slept. She lay in Marcus's guest room, feeling her son moving inside her, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. At 6 a.m., Marcus helped her attach the wire. It was smaller than she expected, disguised as a button on her coat. The FBI had provided it, along with explicit instructions and a waiver Elena had to sign acknowledging the risks. "You do not have to do this," Julian said for the 20th time. He had been saying it every hour since yesterday like a mantra. "Yes, I do," Elena replied. "This is the only play we have left." They drove to Central Park in Marcus's SUV. The November morning was cold and clear, frost sparkling on the grass. Central Park was beautiful at this hour, peaceful before the city fully woke up. The low boathouse sat beside the lake, a beautiful building that hosted weddings and expensive dinners. At 7:45 a.m., it was nearly empty. A few early joggers, a man walking his dog, a couple taking sunrise photographs. At least 3 of them were FBI agents. Elena recognized Agent Gonzalez pretending to be a jogger, recognizable from the photos she had seen on the FBI website. Elena chose a table on the patio overlooking the water. She ordered coffee she would not drink, and she waited. At exactly 8 a.m., Vanessa appeared. She wore designer sunglasses and carried a Birkin bag that probably cost more than a used car. She looked perfect, as always. Not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in her cream-colored coat. She looked like someone who had never lost anything in her life. She sat across from Elena without preamble. No greeting, no pretense of civility. "Where is the laptop?" Vanessa asked. "Where is the money?" Vanessa pulled out a tablet from her bag. $500,000. "All I need is your bank routing number for a wire transfer." Elena did not move. "Why are you paying me if I am bluffing?" "I am not paying you. I am buying your silence." Vanessa's voice was cold, businesslike. "About what?" Vanessa leaned forward slightly, and Elena saw something flash across her face. Pride. Arrogance. The need to be recognized for her intelligence. "About the fact that David does not know half of what I have done. About the fact that once I marry him and gain legal access to all his accounts, I will not need him anymore either." Elena's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice neutral. "What do you mean? You think I did this for him?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp. "David is a means to an end, a useful stepping stone. Once we are married, once I have legal protection and financial access, David might find that his career takes some unfortunate turns, that scandals emerge, that his usefulness has expired. You would destroy him too," Elena said, making sure her voice carried clearly to the wire. "I would harvest what I have built and move on to better opportunities," Vanessa corrected. "David is ambitious but weak, easily manipulated. He actually believes he loves me. It is pathetic." She smiled coldly. "Men like him are a dime a dozen, Elena. Ambitious, corruptible, disposable. The real power is not in being the politician. It is in controlling the politician. So why tell me this? Because you are already destroyed. No one believes you. No one will ever believe you again. I made sure of that." Vanessa leaned back, completely at ease. "And I want you to know, when your son asks about you someday, I will tell him his mother was too weak and disturbed to care for him. I will make sure he forgets you ever existed." Elena stood slowly. "I have heard enough." "The laptop?" Vanessa demanded. "There is no laptop, Vanessa." Vanessa's face went white. "What?" "But there is this." Elena tapped the button on her coat. FBI agents emerged from their positions around the boathouse. 4 of them, moving quickly and professionally. Agent Gonzalez led the approach, badge out. "Vanessa Pierce," she said in that authoritative FBI voice, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit campaign finance violations, obstruction of justice, and embezzlement of campaign funds." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time since Elena had met her, Vanessa looked afraid. "The money you just tried to transfer," Elena said, standing. "Agent Gonzalez tracked that account. It traces back to David's campaign donors. You have been embezzling for 18 months. This is entrapment," Vanessa finally found her voice. "You cannot use this. I was coerced." "Actually, we can," Agent Gonzalez said, handcuffing Vanessa's wrist behind her back. Mrs. Cross was acting as a confidential informant under FBI supervision, and you confessed to multiple federal crimes of your own free will. No one coerced you to admit to planning to embezzle from your future husband. Vanessa looked at Elena with pure, undiluted hatred. "You calculated bitch." Elena met her eyes calmly. "I learned from the best." As they led Vanessa away toward an unmarked FBI vehicle, Elena felt Julian's hand on her shoulder. He had been watching from behind a tree 20 yards away, along with Marcus. "You did it," Julian said quietly. "You actually did it." Elena watched Vanessa being placed in the back of the FBI vehicle, hands cuffed, sunglasses knocked askew, perfect hair finely disheveled. "No, we did it." Marcus jogged over, grinning like a kid at Christmas. "That was amazing. You were amazing." "Did you see her face when the FBI showed up?" Agent Gonzalez approached them, removing her jogging disguise. "Mrs. Cross, we are going to need you to come to the FBI office to make a formal statement. But I wanted to say, what you did took serious courage." "Will this be enough?" Elena asked. "To prove I am not crazy? To prove David was part of this?" "The confession about embezzling and planning to destroy David might actually help your custody case," Agent Gonzalez said, "because it shows Vanessa is willing to betray anyone, including co-conspirators. It makes her testimony against you less credible. As for David's involvement, we will need to question him. But Mrs. Pierce's statements suggest he was not fully aware of the extent of her schemes." Elena nodded. It was not complete victory. David was still culpable for the gaslighting, for the affair, for being complicit in destroying her credibility. But at least Vanessa, the true architect, was in custody. "We have 90 minutes until the custody hearing," Julian said, checking his watch. "Agent Gonzalez, can you testify?" "I will be there," she confirmed, "with a full report of Mrs. Pierce's arrest and confession." Marcus pulled Elena into a hug. "Ready to finish this?" Elena looked toward the lake, watching the sun sparkle on the water. She thought about the past months of hell, the gaslighting, the drugs, the systematic destruction of her credibility. The nights crying alone convinced she was losing her mind, but she had survived, more than survived. She had fought back. She had outplayed the person who thought she was too weak to fight. "Let us end this," Elena said. And for the first time in months, she felt like she might actually win. Manhattan Family Court was a circus. News of Vanessa Pierce's arrest had broken an hour earlier on every news channel and social media platform. Reporters lined the courthouse steps 3 deep, cameras and microphones creating a forest of technology. "Mrs. Cross, is it true Vanessa Pierce confessed to framing you?" "Elena, how do you feel right now? Will you pursue charges against your husband?" Elena ignored them all, walking between Marcus and Julian like they were bodyguards. Margaret Chen met them at the courthouse entrance, her face unreadable. "The judge has reviewed Agent Gonzalez's preliminary report," Margaret said quietly as they walked through security. "She wants to hear directly from both parties before ruling." "This is good, Elena. This is very good." Courtroom 304 was packed beyond capacity. The gallery was standing room only. Every major news outlet had a reporter present. Elena recognized faces from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the New York Times, the Washington Post. This was no longer just a custody case. It was national news. David sat alone at the plaintiff's table. Catherine Walsh had withdrawn as his counsel overnight, issuing a terse statement about conflicts of interest. He wore a rumpled suit, the first time Elena had seen him look anything less than perfectly groomed. There were bags under his eyes. His hair was not quite as perfect as usual. He looked like a man whose world was collapsing. Judge Reynolds entered and everyone stood. She took her seat with the air of someone who had not slept much and had no patience for theatrics. "Please be seated. We are here for final arguments in the custody matter of Cross versus Cross, though I understand the circumstances have changed significantly overnight." Agent Maria Gonzalez stood in the gallery. "Your Honor, may I approach?" "Agent Gonzalez, welcome. I understand you have information relevant to these proceedings." Agent Gonzalez approached the bench, her FBI credentials visible. She provided a folder of documents. "Your Honor, this morning at approximately 8:15 a.m., my unit arrested Vanessa Pierce, Mr. David Cross's campaign manager, on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, campaign finance violations, and conspiracy. During her arrest, Ms. Pierce confessed to orchestrating a campaign to discredit Mrs. Elena Cross through falsified medical records and drug prenatal vitamins. She also confessed to embezzling campaign funds and to planning future criminal activities against Mr. Cross himself." The courtroom erupted in noise. Judge Reynolds pounded her gavel. "Order! I will have order!" David's face had gone gray. He looked like he might be sick. Your Honor, Margaret Chen stood. In light of this development and Mrs. Cross's cooperation with federal law enforcement, we respectfully request that all custody determinations be reconsidered. Judge Reynolds held up the FBI report. Mr. Cross, where is your attorney? David stood slowly. I cannot afford one anymore, Your Honor. My campaign suspended operations this morning. My donors have all withdrawn support. Do you wish to postpone these proceedings until you can secure representation? David looked at Elena for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but perhaps the first glimmer of honesty. No, Your Honor, I would like to make a statement. The judge gestured for him to proceed. David turned to face Elena directly. I laughed at you in this courtroom 3 weeks ago. I laughed at your tears, your pain, your desperation. I made you doubt your own sanity. I made you think you were crazy. His voice cracked. Vanessa convinced me you were the problem, that you were unstable and would ruin my political career, that our son deserved better than a mother who was falling apart. And I believed her because it was easier than admitting that I had failed as a husband, that I had become exactly what I swore I would never be. Elena said nothing, her face impassive. My father abandoned us when I was 8 years old, David continued, left my mother with nothing but debt and broken promises. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I watched her struggle every day, and I swore I would never be like him, that I would never be the man who destroyed his family. He laughed bitterly, but in trying to escape his shadow, I became him. I destroyed my family. I destroyed you, and I did it for ambition, for power, for a congressional seat I will never have now. Judge Reynolds watched him carefully. Mr. Cross, are you represented in the federal investigation? Yes, Your Honor, federal public defender. I have agreed to a plea deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I am pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit campaign finance violations and obstruction of justice. I will serve 18 months minimum security. The gallery gasped. This was news that had not broken yet. And regarding custody, the judge asked. David looked at Elena. I am withdrawing my petition for custody, full physical and legal custody to Elena. I will accept whatever visitation arrangement she is willing to grant after I complete my sentence. More gasps, cameras clicked like rain on windows. Elena stood, her hands trembling. Your Honor, may I respond? Go ahead, Mrs. Cross. Elena walked to the center of the courtroom, and every eye was on her. The pregnant woman who had been laughed at, drugged, gaslit, destroyed. The woman who had refused to stay destroyed. 3 weeks ago, I sat in this courtroom and cried while my husband laughed. He made me doubt my reality, my sanity, my worth as a human being and as a mother. He systematically destroyed my credibility so that no one would believe me when I told the truth. She looked at David. You do not get a redemption arc. You do not get to have a touching moment of self-awareness and be forgiven. What you did to me was abuse. It was cruel. It was calculated. David nodded, accepting. But you are right about one thing, Elena continued. Our son deserves better than what we have become. He deserves better than parents who use him as a weapon. So here is what is going to happen. She turned to address the judge. I am not taking David's money or his property. I am not interested in vengeance or financial compensation. What I want is full custody of my son and the freedom to rebuild my life. Julian stood in the gallery and Elena acknowledged him with a slight nod. Julian Hart has offered to invest in a venture I am launching, a financial forensics firm specializing in exposing corporate fraud, identifying financial abuse in relationships, and helping women escape economically coercive situations. I will use what happened to me to help other women. She looked back at David. As for you, you will get supervised visitation once you complete your federal sentence and 6 months of documented therapy with a licensed psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse. Not because I forgive you, not because I think you deserve a relationship with our son, but because I refuse to be the kind of person who uses a child as a weapon of revenge. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Mrs. Cross, that is remarkably generous given what you have endured. It is not generosity, Your Honor. It is self-preservation. Elena's voice was steady and clear. Revenge keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. I choose freedom. I choose to build a life where my son will never see a woman begging to be believed. Where he will grow up knowing that the truth matters and that abusers face consequences. The judge nodded slowly, clearly moved. Very well. I am granting full physical and legal custody to Elena Cross. Mr. Cross will have no visitation rights until he has completed his federal sentence and 6 months of therapy, at which point supervised visitation may be reconsidered based on the recommendation of a court-appointed child psychologist. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded like a door closing on one chapter of Elena's life and opening another. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. The gallery buzzed with conversation and speculation. But Elena just stood there, both hands on her belly, feeling her son kick beneath her palms. Marcus hugged her first, lifting her carefully off the ground. You did it, sis. You actually did it. Julian approached more hesitantly. Elena, She hugged him too, cutting off whatever he was going to say. Thank you for showing up this time, for staying. Always, he said quietly. As they left the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Elena stopped on the courthouse steps. The November sun was bright and cold. She looked at all the cameras, all the microphones pointed at her face, and she spoke clearly. I have one thing I want to say. To every woman who has been gaslit, who has been told she is crazy, who has been made to doubt her own mind and reality, you are not alone. You are not crazy. Trust yourself. Document everything. Find your people and fight because you deserve to be believed. The crowd applauded. Elena walked down the courthouse steps flanked by her brother and by the man who had finally learned to show up when it mattered. The November sun felt warm on her face despite the cold. For the first time in months, Elena felt like she could breathe, like the weight pressing on her chest had finally lifted. She placed both hands on her belly. We won, she whispered to her son. We actually won. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Elena Cross allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. Spring in Brooklyn smelled like new beginnings. Elena stood in the nursery of her brownstone, rocking 3-month-old Marcus Torres Cross in her arms. He had her dark curls and green eyes, and every time she looked at him, she saw her own strength reflected back. The brownstone was small but filled with light. 2 bedrooms in Park Slope, hardwood floors that creaked in the right ways, and a backyard where she could already imagine Marcus taking his first steps. Truth and balance, financial forensics occupied the first floor. The second floor was home. You are working again, Julian said from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Elena smiled without looking up. I am always working. That is what I loved about you. He paused deliberately. Love, present tense. Elena looked up, surprised. They had been dancing around this for months. Careful boundaries, friendship rebuilding into something more. But neither had spoken it aloud until now. Julian sat beside her. I am not here to save you, Elena. I know you do not need saving. I am here because watching you burn everything down and build something better is the most remarkable thing I have ever witnessed. You are brilliant and fierce, and you refuse to stay broken. You just made personal growth sound like a business investment, Elena said, tears burning, but they were good tears. And you weaponized accounting, Julian replied. We balance each other. Baby Marcus stirred in his sleep, tiny fist curling around Elena's finger. They both watched him, this perfect, small human who had been at the center of so much pain and was now at the center of so much hope. Can we do this? Julian asked quietly. The rebuilding trust, taking it slow, co-parenting as more than friends thing. We can try, Elena said. No promises, just honesty and showing up. I will take that. Elena's laptop sat open on the dresser, notifications piling up. 3 new clients that morning. Women escaping financially abusive relationships. Truth and Balance had helped 127 women in 6 months. 17 fraudulent schemes exposed. 4 custody cases won. 2 criminal fraud trials. The work was exhausting and necessary and meaningful in ways she had never imagined. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You won. Congratulations. But remember, I made you sharper. You should thank me. Vanessa. Elena showed Julian. Vanessa somehow texting from prison. Are you going to respond? Elena stared at the message. Part of her wanted something cutting, something that would hurt Vanessa the way Vanessa had hurt her. Instead, she typed, I do not thank my enemies. I outlast them. She deleted and blocked the number. What do you want to do today? Julian asked. Elena looked around, at her sleeping son, at the man who had learned to show up, at the laptop full of women asking for help, at the life she had built from ruins. I want to be present, just here, now, with everything that matters. They sat watching Marcus sleep. Outside, Brooklyn hummed. Children played in the park. Someone barbecued, charcoal smell drifting through the window. A dog barked. Life continued, indifferent to personal tragedies and triumphs. But Elena Cross, who had once cried in a courtroom while her husband laughed, who had been drugged and gaslit and systematically destroyed, was finally truly free. Not free from the past, free from its power over her future. She had learned something that Vanessa, for all her intelligence, would never understand. That real power was not in controlling others. Real power was in choosing yourself, in building instead of destroying, in showing up authentically instead of performing for an audience that did not care. Marcus made a small sound, and Elena adjusted him gently. He settled back into sleep, trusting completely. I am writing a book, Elena said suddenly, about everything. About surviving coercive control, about chemical gaslighting, about fighting back. What will you call it? After the laugh, she said, the dedication will be, for every woman who was told she was crazy, trust yourself. Julian nodded. It will help a lot of people. I hope so. The afternoon light slanted through the nursery windows, golden and warm. Elena felt Julian's presence beside her, steady and real. She felt her son breathing against her chest. She felt the pull of work downstairs, women waiting for her help. And she felt, for the first time since David had laughed in that courtroom 6 months ago, completely at peace. The war was over. She had won. Not because she had destroyed her enemies, but because she had refused to let them destroy her. That was the real victory, the only one that mattered. 2 years passed like water downstream, inevitable, transformative. Marcus Torres Cross took his first steps in the backyard on a sunny afternoon while Julian filmed everything. Truth and Balance expanded to 4 offices across the country. Elena testified before Congress about financial abuse. Her book hit the New York Times bestseller list for 26 weeks. And slowly, carefully, she and Julian rebuilt what they had lost 8 years ago. The first kiss came 6 months after the custody ruling. The first I love you 3 months later. The quiet intimacy of building a life together without trauma bonding. On a Saturday morning in May, Elena sat in Prospect Park watching Marcus play. He was 2.5, all energy and determination and unstoppable curiosity. He had her stubbornness and his uncle's mischievous streak. I got a call yesterday, Julian said, watching Marcus chase pigeons. Venture capital wants to take Truth and Balance national. 20 offices, $50 million. They are calling it a social impact unicorn. Elena watched her son. What do you think I should do? Whatever makes you happy. Not what makes me happy or looks impressive. Just what makes you happy. Marcus ran over with a dandelion. Mama, flower. Elena took it like glass. Thank you, baby. It is beautiful. He grinned and ran off again. I have been thinking, Julian said, about us. We have been taking it slow for 2.5 years. Elena's heart beat faster. Julian, I am not proposing. Not yet. But maybe we could stop pretending we are just friends, co-parenting. Maybe we could actually be together. Elena looked at him. The man who had abandoned her once and spent years making up for it. The man who showed up when it mattered. Who learned that money meant nothing without human connection. I want that, she said softly. I want you. Not as a savior or symbol, just as you. Flawed and present and real. Yeah. And they kissed while Marcus played and spring sun warmed them, and life went beautifully, imperfectly on. That evening, after Marcus slept, Elena worked on expansion proposals. Julian was on the couch with his laptop, domestic and ordinary and perfect. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. I am out. Thought you should know. Vanessa. 5 years served. good behavior, the system that rarely kept white-collar criminals their full sentence. Elena stared at the message. Part of her felt panic. Part wanted to call everyone who could protect her. But mostly she felt nothing. Vanessa had no power over her anymore. Not her thoughts, not her fears, not her future. She blocked the number without responding. Later, she stood in Marcus's nursery. He slept with his stuffed giraffe, one small fist against his cheek. Elena brushed his curls back. "You are going to grow up in a different world," she whispered, "where women are believed, where abuse has consequences, where truth matters." She kissed his forehead. "I am building that world for you, every day, one case at a time." In the living room, Julian had fallen asleep with his laptop open. Elena covered him with a blanket. He was not perfect. She was not perfect. They were both scarred and healing and learning to trust, but they were doing it together. Elena stood in her brownstone, looking at the life built from ruins and ashes and determination. Not the life she imagined at 25. Not a fairy tale ending. Better, real. She had survived gaslighting, chemical abuse, custody battles, public humiliation, conspiracy. She had been broken to her foundation and rebuilt herself stronger. Elena Cross, the woman who cried while her husband laughed, who was drugged and discredited and nearly defeated, had become more than a survivor. She had become free. Freedom was not about revenge or victory or proving anything. Freedom was waking up each morning and choosing yourself. Choosing authenticity over performance. Truth over convenience. Building instead of destroying. Outside, Brooklyn stretched endlessly. Millions of people, millions of stories, struggles and triumphs happening simultaneously. The world was full of pain and hope in equal measure. Elena turned off the lights. Tomorrow she would wake and do it again. Help more women, build her company, raise her son, love the man who learned to show up. Tonight she allowed herself rest. She had earned it.